And now we are going to move on to the next objective, which is outline the different types of cell division. So the keywords we're going to talk about with cell division are cell cycle, mitosis, meiosis, and cytokinesis. So first, what is cell division? Cell division it's really important because it's how we grow. It's how living things grow and develop. And it's how we develop from one cell to multiple cells, all the way up to complex multicellular organisms full of different types of cells and systems and organs. And all living things, all organisms have cell division. Bacteria, plants, animals. That's one of the common characteristics of living things, to tie to an earlier objective. For the sake of this lesson and simplicity, we're going to talk about the specifics of cell division in us, in humans. So cell division can be broken down into a few parts. The cell cycle, which is the kind of overarching bird's eye view of what a cell is doing. And then within the cell cycle, there's mitosis or meiosis and cytokinesis. So mitosis or meiosis, and we'll get to the difference between those two in a moment, is the copying and division of genetic material in the nucleus. So the copying and dividing of DNA. So let's see. We have a little animation here of this. So if you watch this little animation, first this yellow circle splits into two, and then the whole big circle splits into two. So the yellow circle is signifying the nucleus, and the nucleus, which is where the DNA is, will split and divide first, and then the rest of the cell will split and divide into two. So the mitosis or meiosis is happening when the yellow circle in the center divides in the nucleus. And then next, cytokinesis is division of the rest of the cell, all of the organelles in the cytoplasm. So again, in this animation, cytokinesis is when this entire blue circle splits into two, and then it results in two cells, which are called two daughter cells. So let's go through each of these parts in a little more detail. So first, cell cycle. So let's look at cell cycle in a little more detail. Like I said, the cell cycle is the bird's eye view of what cells go through to grow and copy themselves. Most of the time, any given cell in this is in this portion of the cell cycle, G1, S, and G2. And these portions of the cycle are called interphase. And then a smaller portion of the time, a cell is actually in active cell division or mitosis or meiosis. So what's going on in each of these phases of the cell cycle? So G1 is when the cell is growing and growing. All the machinery and parts of the cell, the organelles, are growing and the cell's getting bigger. So G1 for growth. And then when the cell gets big enough, it will enter S phase. And this is where the DNA replicates, which is also called DNA synthesis. So S is for synthesis. And then next is the G2 phase. And this is another growth phase where the cell basically checks on everything it just did. It's kind of like a little checkpoint to make sure that no mistakes were made when things were replicated. And before the cell jumps into mitosis and commits to splitting into two, it has this checkpoint of G2. So again, G, growth phase. And then finally, mitosis, the M phase. Oops, I'm sorry. So mitosis is where the cell splits in two. So the two daughter cells. And we'll talk about this in a little more detail in the next slide. But basically, the cell can go through this cycle again and again, and that's how we develop and grow. And there's also the G0 phase, or the G0 phase, which is when the cell is not actively dividing. It's just doing its thing, not actively growing, but it's still functioning as a cell, just not in a growth phase. So let's talk about the specifics of mitosis. So the key word to remember with mitosis is growth, repair, and asexual reproduction. So the process of mitosis is used when a cell needs to grow. So for example, if in utero, when a embryo is growing, there's lots of active mitosis when the cells are dividing and new organs are developing. Repair is another common reason a cell would undergo mitosis. So when like a fully grown organism that's not like developing, lots of repair has to go on. Growth still happens too, but repair might be a little more common use of mitosis. And then asexual reproduction is also an example of when mitosis is used in organisms that reproduce asexually. So in mitosis, we talked about how this is the phase where the genetic material in the nucleus is dividing. So first, we start with, again, we're going to talk about this in humans. So we're going to start with 46 chromosomes. And if you remember from the previous objective, which talks about genetic material, chromosomes and chromatin, you know that humans have 23 chromosomes and 2 copies of each of those chromosomes. So 2 times 23, 46. For the sake of this illustration, it's just showing 2 copies of 1 chromosome. So in this example, red and blue correspond to the same chromosome, 2 different copies of it. So you start with 46 chromosomes, and then the DNA is replicated to become 92 chromosomes. And then the cell undergoes a series of changes, which for this objective, we're just going to talk about this overview, but there's more detail in a future objective about how the machinery of this works. So after the DNA is replicated, then the cell organizes and arranges itself to be able to pull those replicated chromosomes apart. And it'll pull them to 2 opposite sides of the cell and then slowly pinch itself off. Sorry, not 2 opposite sides of the cell. We're still talking about the nucleus. So pull it to 2 opposite sides of the nucleus, and then it will physically get pinched off until there's 2 separate nuclei. And again, you have the proper number of chromosomes in each of these resulting nuclei. So that means 46 for humans again. And then following that is the cytokinesis, where the rest of the cell splits, and then you have 2 identical cells. So meiosis is similar to mitosis, but it's a little bit unique because it's strictly used for sexual reproduction. So it's how sex cells replicate and divide. So sperm cells and egg cells, which are also called gametes. So again, in all the cells in our body, except for sex cells, you have 46 chromosomes, so 23 pairs. And then in meiosis, when you need to form sex cells, these cells are unique because they are called haploid cells. And so they only have 1 copy of each of our chromosomes. So they each have 23 chromosomes. And the reason for this is because they're for the purpose of sexual reproduction. So you need 2 gametes, egg cell and a sperm cell, to come together, and then together they will form a diploid cell when fertilization occurs. So this is how we get to those sex cells. So you start off with a haploid cell, so 46 chromosomes, and then the cell replicates again, and then you get to 92. So far it's looking like mitosis still. And then so the copying happened, and then you get separation of the nuclei, and you get these daughter nuclei. And then you have another splitting where the chromosome pairs split again, so that there's no longer pairs, and each chromosome is just singular. And these are called, again, haploid cells, because there's only half of each pair of chromosomes, so only 23 chromosomes.